an old man in a MAGA hat walks into a busy office only to be mocked, dismissed, and told to leave. But when the truth about his identity is revealed, the entire staff is left speechless. This story will make you rethink how you treat others. Don't miss the powerful lesson. Never underestimate simplicity. Sometimes, the most unassuming people hold the greatest strength. Comments below where you're watching from, and if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel. Life, inspirational, and motivational tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories. Thanks. Let's start the story. Grandbridge Solutions was a bustling hub of innovation. The office building, with its glass walls and sleek interiors, boasted a reputation for cutting-edge technology and a forward-thinking workforce. However, beneath this polished exterior lay cracks in the foundation of its workplace culture. Employees often whispered about favoritism, a lack of accountability, and the cold, hierarchical atmosphere that had started to seep into their daily routines. It wasn't unusual for issues to be ignored or brushed under the rug, and over time, complacency had settled in like an unwelcome guest. Henry Collins, a reserved man in his late 60s, sat quietly in his modest suburban home, pondering the state of his company. He had founded Grandbridge Solutions decades ago with the hope of building something greater than himself, a company that valued innovation and, more importantly, its people. But the complaints he had been hearing recently painted a starkly different picture. Anonymous letters from employees, murmurs of toxic behavior, and reports of a culture that dismissed the little guy had reached his ears. Henry was a man of principle, someone who believed in getting to the heart of matters personally. He had always avoided the spotlight, delegating public appearances to the board members. Most employees wouldn't recognize him even if he stood in the same room. On this particular morning, Henry decided it was time to act. A plan began to form in his mind, one that would allow him to observe the true nature of his workforce. He pulled his signature red MAGA hat off the shelf, a simple yet polarizing accessory he often wore. To him, it wasn't about politics, but a test of character. He had learned over the years that how people treated others, especially those they perceived as different or less powerful, revealed more about them than anything else. This hat would serve as his disguise and his litmus test. Dressed in plain khakis, a slightly wrinkled shirt, and the bold red cap, Henry stepped out the door, determined to uncover the truth about his company. His goal wasn't to reprimand or humiliate anyone. It was to understand and, if necessary, rebuild the culture he had worked so hard to establish. The office lobby buzzed with activity when Henry arrived. Employees passed by in sharp suits and polished shoes, chatting animatedly or glued to their phones. The receptionist, Laura Summers, was stationed at the front desk. Laura was known for her sharp tongue and quick judgments. She had a reputation for being unfiltered, which often made her co-workers either laugh or cringe. Her glances toward the door were fleeting, but when her eyes landed on Henry, her brows furrowed slightly. Dismissing him as someone unimportant, she returned to scrolling on her phone. Henry approached the desk with a polite smile and a friendly tone. "Good morning. I'd like to meet with someone from management if possible." Laura glanced up briefly, her lips pursed. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I thought I could speak with someone." "It won't take long," Henry replied, still maintaining his composure. Laura sighed and leaned back in her chair. "We're a little busy today. Maybe come back later." Her voice carried a hint of irritation, and she didn't bother to mask her disinterest. Turning her attention back to her phone, she added under her breath, "Who wears that hat here anyway?" Henry caught the remark but said nothing. Instead, he took a seat in the lobby, quietly observing the flurry of activity around him. Employees walked past him without so much as a second glance, some even smirking at his hat. He noticed the subtle ways they judged him, the raised eyebrows, the exchanged whispers. Chris Morgan, a middle manager with a knack for appearing busy, strutted through the lobby. Chris thrived on maintaining a polished image and was quick to critique others. When he spotted Henry sitting near the front, he stopped in his tracks and approached Laura. "Who's that?" Chris asked, jerking his chin toward Henry. "Some guy without an appointment," Laura said with a shrug. "Probably lost or something." Chris chuckled. "Well, he's certainly dressed for a different era. I mean, look at that hat. What's he trying to prove?" The comment drew a quiet laugh from Laura, who glanced at Henry with mild amusement. Henry remained calm, his face unreadable. He had been in enough boardrooms to recognize toxic behavior when he saw it. Yet, amidst the dismissive glances and quiet ridicule, he noticed a glimmer of something different. Megan Lopez, a junior employee who had just stepped into the lobby, caught the exchange between Chris and Laura. She frowned slightly, her discomfort evident. While she didn't have the authority to confront them, her body language showed that she didn't approve. Megan hesitated for a moment before walking over to Henry. "Hi, sir. Can I help you with something?" she asked kindly. Henry smiled, appreciating her gesture. "Thank you, young lady. I was hoping to speak with someone in management, but it seems I may have chosen a bad time." Megan glanced toward Laura, who was still engrossed in her phone, and Chris, who had already walked away. "I can check if anyone's available," she offered. "It might take a minute, but I'll see what I can do." "That's very kind of you," Henry said. "Take your time." As Megan walked toward the back offices, Henry continued to observe the environment. His instincts told him there was more to uncover, and the interactions he had witnessed so far confirmed the complaints he had received. This wasn't just about a few bad apples. It was about a culture that needed change. Henry knew he had a long day ahead, but he was ready. What he didn't show was the resolve building within him, a quiet determination to make things right. Henry pushed the glass doors of the Grand Bridge Solutions office open and stepped into the bustling lobby. The hum of keyboards, muffled conversations, and occasional laughter filled the air. He walked in with a slight limp, his old, scuffed briefcase hanging from one hand and his red MAGA hat perched firmly on his head. The hat was a statement piece, not politically charged in his mind, but a simple reminder of his values and an effective way to test how people reacted to someone who stood out. At the front desk sat Laura Summers, the receptionist. She glanced up briefly as Henry approached, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in his appearance. Her lips twitched into a forced smile before her attention quickly returned to her phone. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone flat and devoid of interest. "Good morning," Henry replied with a warm smile. "I was hoping to speak with a manager. I have some questions about your operations." Laura arched an eyebrow, her eyes flitting to the MAGA hat before scanning his worn briefcase and casual attire. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, already assuming the answer. No, I don't," Henry admitted. "But I thought I could just stop by and have a quick chat." Laura let out a small sigh and leaned back in her chair, tapping her nails against the desk. "We're really busy today," she said dismissively. "You should probably come back another time. Maybe call ahead next time?" She didn't bother hiding the disinterest in her voice. Behind her, a colleague chuckled softly, clearly overhearing the interaction. Henry nodded politely, stepping to the side to take a seat in the corner of the lobby. As he set his briefcase down, he noticed Laura rolling her eyes and whispering to a coworker nearby. "Who just walks into a place like this without an appointment?" she murmured, loud enough for Henry to hear. "And that hat? Seriously? Who does he think he is?" The comment stung, but Henry's face remained neutral. Years of experience in boardrooms and negotiations had taught him the value of restraint. He settled into his seat, his eyes calmly scanning the room. He noticed employees walking by, some pausing briefly to glance at him before quickly looking away. A few smirked as they passed, their expressions betraying quiet amusement. Chris Morgan, a middle manager with an inflated sense of self-importance, entered the lobby moments later. He was the type of person who thrived on control and enjoyed asserting his authority whenever possible. Spotting Henry, Chris approached Laura, his tone carrying an air of curiosity laced with disdain. "Who's the guy in the corner?" Chris asked, nodding toward Henry. "Some walk in," Laura replied with a shrug. "No appointment. Wants to talk to management." Chris let out a short laugh, glancing at Henry's hat. "A MAGA hat? Wow, that's bold. What is this, a history museum?" He turned to a nearby employee and joked, "Looks like someone missed the memo about living in the 21st century." The comment drew a few chuckles from the employees in earshot. Henry, who was quietly observing, noted the lack of professionalism and respect. He made a mental note of Chris's behavior, but kept his demeanor calm, his hands folded neatly in his lap. "Excuse me," Chris called out to Henry, walking closer. "Can I help you with something?" Henry looked up, his face kind and unassuming. "I was hoping to speak with someone about your company's operations. Just trying to learn more about what you do here." Chris crossed his arms, his tone sharp. "And you thought you could just walk in off the street? We're a busy company, sir. Maybe you should take that hat and come back when you have an actual appointment." The sarcasm in his voice was palpable. Henry nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. I appreciate your time." Chris turned back to Laura, shaking his head. "Honestly, some people think they can just waltz in here like it's a coffee shop." He walked away, leaving Laura to stifle a laugh. As Henry remained seated, he began to notice other troubling behaviors. Employees loitered in the hallways, chatting about personal matters instead of focusing on their work. A group near the coffee machine laughed loudly, seemingly oblivious to the customers waiting for assistance at the front desk. One employee dismissed a caller with a curt, "We're busy, call back later," before returning to her conversation. Despite the unprofessionalism around him, Henry remained composed. His gaze softened when he noticed Megan Lopez, a junior employee, walking into the lobby. Megan was relatively new to the company, and her kind demeanor often set her apart from her colleagues. She noticed Henry sitting quietly in the corner, her eyes flickering to Laura and Chris, who were still whispering to each other. Megan approached Henry with a polite smile. "Hi, sir. Can I help you with anything?" she asked, her voice warm. Henry looked up, appreciating her effort. "Thank you, young lady. I was hoping to speak with someone about your operations, but it seems I may have come at a bad time." Megan glanced at Laura, who was now scrolling on her phone, and Chris, who had disappeared into his office. She frowned slightly, clearly uncomfortable with how Henry had been treated. "I'm sorry about that," she said sincerely. "I can check if someone is available. It might take a moment, but I'll see what I can do." "That's very kind of you," Henry said. "Take your time." As Megan walked toward the back offices, Henry watched her with a sense of quiet admiration. Her professionalism and willingness to help stood out in stark contrast to the dismissive attitudes of her coworkers. He made a mental note of her name, knowing that she represented the kind of employee he wanted to see more of at Grand Bridge Solutions. For now, Henry continued to observe. The behavior he had witnessed so far confirmed the complaints he had received about the company's culture. He knew there was still more to uncover, but one thing was clear: changes were long overdue. Henry leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but resolute. He was here for answers, and he wouldn't leave until he had them. Henry sat quietly in the corner of the bustling lobby, his eyes scanning the office's ebb and flow. He had already seen enough to confirm the complaints he'd been hearing, but he wanted to push a little further. Rising from his chair, he approached the reception desk, where Laura was once again engrossed in her phone. "Excuse me," Henry said politely, placing his hand gently on the edge of the counter. "I was hoping to learn a bit more about how your team handles customer inquiries. Is there a manager I can speak to about your processes?" Laura barely glanced up, her annoyance evident. "Like I said earlier, sir, we're busy. If you don't have an appointment, there's not much I can do." She gestured vaguely toward the seating area, signaling for him to sit back down. Henry held his ground, still polite but persistent. "I understand, but I've been waiting for quite some time now. Surely someone can spare a few minutes." Before Laura could respond, Chris Morgan appeared, clipboard in hand, his expression a mixture of impatience and irritation. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone sharp. His eyes landed on Henry, and his lip curled slightly as he noticed the MAGA hat once again. "This gentleman is asking about our processes," Laura said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Doesn't have an appointment, though." Chris sighed audibly, stepping closer to Henry. "Sir, I don't know where you think you are, but we're not exactly in the business of giving impromptu tours or Q&A sessions. If you're trying to sell something or just curious, maybe this isn't the best place for that." Henry remained composed, his hands resting lightly on the briefcase he carried. "I'm not selling anything. I'm just trying to understand how things work here. Isn't that a reasonable question?" Chris smirked, clearly enjoying the attention from a few employees who had gathered nearby. "Look, maybe you should take that MAGA hat and find another company to visit," he said loudly, ensuring the small group of onlookers could hear. The comment drew chuckles and murmurs, the kind of dismissive laughter that stings more than outright hostility. Henry's expression didn't change, but his silence was heavy with thought. Megan, who had returned to the lobby moments earlier, stood frozen near the coffee machine, her face etched with discomfort. She opened her mouth to speak but was interrupted by Chris, who glanced in her direction. "Megan, why don't you get back to work? This isn't your concern." Megan hesitated but ultimately nodded, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She cast Henry an apologetic glance before retreating to her desk. Henry noticed her gesture and gave her a small, reassuring nod before turning back to Chris. "Thank you for your time," Henry said calmly, his tone steady but firm. He turned and walked toward the exit, his briefcase swinging slightly with each step. As he reached the door, Laura's voice carried across the lobby, muttering loud enough for everyone to hear. Good riddance. The laughter that followed was subdued but audible, and Henry didn't look back. His steps were measured, his face impassive, but his mind was racing. The dismissive attitudes, the lack of professionalism, the clear divide between employees like Megan and those like Chris and Laura, it was all exactly what he needed to see. He had come to Grandbridge Solutions seeking answers, and now he had them. Later that afternoon, as the office hummed along with its usual rhythm, an email notification popped up on every employee's screen. The subject line read, "Emergency company-wide meeting at 3 p.m. Speculation spread like wildfire. Employees exchanged glances, whispering over cubicles and in break rooms. "What do you think it's about?" one asked. "Maybe layoffs?" another guessed nervously. Chris, leaning against the coffee machine, waved off their concerns. "Probably just another one of those corporate culture talks," he said dismissively. "They love to waste our time with that nonsense." Laura, perched at her desk, chimed in. "Well, whatever it is, let's hope it's quick. I've got better things to do than sit through another boring meeting." Megan, sitting quietly at her desk, felt a knot of unease growing in her stomach. She couldn't shake the image of Henry walking out of the office, his quiet dignity in stark contrast to the way he had been treated. She didn't know who he was, but something about the way he carried himself suggested he wasn't just some random visitor. As 3 p.m. approached, the office grew quieter, the usual chatter replaced by a tense anticipation. Employees filed into the conference room, some clutching notebooks, others with their phones in hand, ready to scroll through social media while the meeting dragged on. Chris took a seat near the front, his posture relaxed, while Megan slipped into a chair near the back, her hands folded nervously in her lap. When the door opened, the murmur stopped abruptly. Henry entered the room, this time dressed in a sharp suit, his red MAGA hat still perched on his head. The briefcase was gone, replaced by a folder he carried under one arm. He walked to the front of the room, his steps deliberate, his expression unreadable. The silence was deafening. Laura's mouth fell open, and Chris's confident smirk vanished in an instant. Megan's eyes widened in recognition, her heart racing as she pieced together what was happening. "I'm going to have to take them to the hospital," she whispered. Henry placed the folder on the table and looked out at the sea of faces before him. The weight of his gaze was enough to make even the most complacent employees sit up straighter in their chairs. He took a deep breath, his voice calm but commanding as he began to speak. "Good afternoon," he said, his tone measured. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Henry Collins. I am the founder and CEO of Grandbridge Solutions." The collective gasp that followed was almost audible. Employees exchanged wide-eyed glances, their whispers barely contained. Chris shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his confidence crumbling as Henry continued. "They haven't a single photograph, no eyewitness, no records of any activity in the property. This morning I came to this office not as your CEO, but as an ordinary visitor. I wanted to see how this company operates, how our employees interact with one another and with our clients. What I saw was both enlightening and deeply disappointing." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Henry's eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on Chris and Laura, who were visibly squirming. Megan, on the other hand, felt a surge of hope. For the first time, it felt like someone was paying attention to the issues she had been too afraid to voice. "I believe in this company," Henry said, his voice steady. "But I also believe that a company is only as strong as its people. And right now we have some serious work to do." The employees of Grand Bridge Solutions sat shoulder to shoulder in the large conference room, the air thick with unease and speculation. The emergency meeting had caught everyone off guard. Some muttered about possible restructuring or layoffs, while others were simply curious. For most, it was the first time they would meet the company's elusive CEO, Henry Collins, who was rumored to rarely make public appearances. Chris Morgan sat near the front, his arms crossed with a self-assured smirk, while Laura Summers whispered sarcastic comments to the colleague beside her. Megan Lopez sat near the back, her hands clasped nervously, the events of the morning still playing in her mind. When the door opened, silence fell over the room like a heavy curtain. The first thing everyone noticed was the bold red MAGA hat. Henry Collins, now dressed in a crisp navy suit, strode purposefully into the room, carrying a stack of papers under one arm. His posture was confident, and his calm demeanor only heightened the tension. A few employees exchanged wide-eyed glances, whispering in disbelief. Lara's jaw dropped as recognition dawned on her. The old man she had dismissed and mocked earlier that day was standing before her, not as a visitor, but as the CEO of the company. Chris shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier bravado evaporating. Megan's eyes widened, her heart pounding as she realized the significance of Henry's presence. Henry placed his papers on the podium at the front of the room and looked out at the assembled staff. He took his time, letting the silence stretch until the weight of the moment was palpable. Then, in a calm and steady voice, he began, "Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Henry Collins. I founded Grand Bridge Solutions nearly 3 decades ago with the hope of building not just a company, but a community, a place where innovation, respect, and professionalism could thrive." His gaze swept across the room, his eyes lingering briefly on Chris and Laura before moving on. "This morning I came to this office as an unannounced visitor. I wanted to see for myself what this company has become, not through reports or presentations, but through the people who make it run day in and day out." The room was deathly quiet. Even the faint rustle of papers or the hum of the air conditioning seemed to vanish. Henry's voice remained steady, but there was a sharp edge to his words. "What I experienced today was eye-opening. I was dismissed, mocked, and treated with a lack of respect that no visitor or employee should ever experience in this company." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Chris sank lower in his chair, avoiding Henry's gaze, while Laura's face turned crimson. Henry didn't name names, but the weight of his words made it clear that those who had acted unprofessionally knew exactly who they were. I witnessed employees gossiping in hallways instead of working. I saw customer inquiries ignored or handled carelessly. And I heard remarks that were not only unprofessional, but downright disrespectful. Henry's tone softened slightly as he continued. "But amidst all of this, I also saw something hopeful. One employee stood out, not for her title or experience, but for her kindness and willingness to help. Megan Lopez, please stand." Megan's face flushed as all eyes turned toward her. She hesitated for a moment before rising slowly, her nervousness evident. Henry's expression warmed as he looked at her. the Post Malone. Megan, your professionalism and respect for others represent exactly what this company stands for. In a moment when you could have ignored me like so many others, you chose to act with integrity. I want to thank you for reminding me that the values we built this company on still exist. The room erupted into a smattering of applause, though some employees clapped hesitantly, unsure of how to react. Megan sat down quickly, her heart racing, but she couldn't hide the small smile of pride that tugged at her lips. Henry's tone shifted again, returning to its calm authority. Let me be clear. This company cannot and will not succeed with the kind of culture I saw today. Respect, professionalism, and accountability are not optional. There are requirements. And starting today, there will be changes. He pulled a sheet of paper from the stack on the podium and held it up. Effective immediately, all employees will be required to attend mandatory training sessions on workplace ethics, customer service, and respect. These sessions are not negotiable. They are the first step in rebuilding the culture of this company. Chris squirmed in his seat, his earlier confidence completely shattered. Laura stared at the desk in front of her, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Furthermore, Henry continued, we will be implementing a new system for evaluating employee behavior and performance. This includes anonymous feedback channels to ensure that issues within the workplace can be addressed swiftly and fairly. Toxic behavior will no longer be tolerated, and those who engage in it will face appropriate consequences. End of chapter 14. His words were direct, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The atmosphere in the room was tense, but there was also a sense of hope, especially for employees like Megan, who had long wished for a change. Henry took a deep breath before delivering his final message. I want every person in this room to understand something important. It's not about a hat or your assumptions about someone's appearance or beliefs. It's about how you treat people, no matter who they are. Actions define character, and character defines this company. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room one last time. Grandbridge Solutions was built on values that matter, and those values will guide us forward, starting today. The room remained silent as Henry gathered his papers and stepped away from the podium. Without another word, he walked out of the conference room, leaving the employees to sit in stunned reflection. Some exchanged nervous glances, while others, like Megan, felt a quiet sense of vindication. Change was coming, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like the company was heading in the right direction. The aftermath of the meeting sent ripples through the office. Employees returned to their desks with hushed whispers, the weight of Henry's words still lingering in the air. Laura Summers sat at her desk, her usual air of superiority replaced with quiet anxiety. She had been summoned to HR immediately after the meeting, where she was informed that her role would be reassigned to a less visible position. Her dismissive attitude and lack of professionalism had finally caught up with her. For Laura, the sting wasn't just in the reassignment, but in knowing that she had failed to live up to the expectations of a man she had judged so unfairly. Chris Morgan, too, found himself in the spotlight, but not in the way he liked. As he sat in the cramped HR office, the gravity of his actions hit him. He was placed on probation and required to attend leadership training sessions. The snide remarks and arrogance that had once served him so well were now glaring liabilities. Chris had always prided himself on being untouchable, But Henry's intervention had shattered that illusion. For the first time in his career, he realized that respect wasn't optional, it was mandatory. Meanwhile, Megan Lopez was called into Henry's office. Her hands trembled slightly as she stepped inside, unsure of what to expect. Henry greeted her with a warm smile, his demeanor kind but firm. "Megan," he began, "I want to thank you again for the way you handled yourself today. In an environment that clearly has room for improvement, you stood out as a beacon of what this company should represent." Megan blushed, feeling both proud and overwhelmed. "Thank you, Mr. Collins," she said softly. "I just did what felt right." "And that's exactly why I'm offering you a new position," Henry continued. "I'd like you to take on a role where you can help shape this company's culture moving forward. You've shown that you have the empathy and professionalism we need, and I believe you're ready to take on more responsibility." Megan's eyes widened, a mix of shock and gratitude washing over her. I don't know what to say. Thank you so much for this opportunity." Henry nodded. "You've earned it." By the end of the day, the changes Henry had promised were already beginning to take effect. Notices about the new training sessions were sent out, and the feedback channels were made live. The air in the office felt different, not completely transformed, but charged with the possibility of something better. Before leaving, Henry called the staff together for a final address. He stood in the center of the lobby, his presence commanding yet approachable. Employees gathered around, their expressions a mix of curiosity and respect. "I want to leave you all with one final thought," Henry said, his voice steady. "What happened today wasn't about a hat or a visitor in the lobby. It was about something much deeper. How we treat one another. Every person who walks through these doors, whether they're a colleague, a customer, or a stranger, deserves respect. That's not just a rule, it's a value." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Actions define character, and character defines this company. If we want Grand Bridge Solutions to be successful, we must start with ourselves, treat others with kindness, professionalism, and dignity. That's how we build something that lasts." The room was silent, but the energy was palpable. For many, it was a wake-up call. For others, like Megan, it was a call to action. As Henry gathered his belongings and walked toward the door, the employees watched him leave with a newfound respect. Laura and Chris, standing off to the side, exchanged a glance, their expressions subdued. Megan, however, stood a little taller, feeling inspired by Henry's words and the trust he had placed in her. From her desk, Megan watched Henry step outside, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the office. She smiled to herself, vowing to carry his message forward. She didn't just want to do better for herself. She wanted to help create a workplace where kindness and respect weren't the exception, but the rule. As the doors closed behind Henry, the employees returned to their desks, ready to face the changes ahead. And for the first time in a long time, Grandbridge Solutions felt like a place where something truly meaningful could grow. Did this story make you think about how we treat others? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar? We'd love to hear your perspective, or any real-life story where kindness and respect made a difference. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this.